Hey everybody, we are moving right along in the Pareto web series, and we're going to be covering how to create a serverless CRUD API that uses node.js and DynamoDB directly using the Amplify CLI, and how to integrate that CLI into React pretty much all within 30 minutes, really. It really shouldn't take too long. So let's dive into it. So let's go ahead and open up another instance of our terminal here. And let's check Amplify status to see what the status of our Amplify deployment is. No change. Okay, let's go ahead and do Amplify add API here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, so select from one of the below mentioned services, GraphQL or REST. We're going to go with REST API. So we're making a DynamoDB based CRUD API, meaning that we can create, read, update, and delete data. So pretty simple. What we're going to use for it is we're going to use it to have a events system, meaning that I, as a mentor on the Pareto platform, want to organize a pair programming session for my students. Therefore, I want to be able to create an event, and once that happens, I want my students to receive a notification mentioning that, hey, this event has been scheduled. So let's go ahead and call this events, call the route / events. Choose a Lambda source. Well, I guess we're going to go ahead and create a new Lambda function. We'll call it Pareto events. So we have two options here. We can make a CRUD function for Amazon DynamoDB with built-in integration with APIGateway and DynamoDB, or a serverless express function. So what that second option would be is essentially it's a serverless Express.js server that you can program different routes into, and it would be accessible through Amazon API Gateway. But for what we're going to do here, we're just going to go ahead and run a CRUD function. So it's asking us, choose a DynamoDB data source option. Do we want to use a DynamoDB table that's configured, or to create a new DynamoDB table? We're going to go ahead and create a new one. And it's going to ask, and this is the NoSQL database wizard. So we're going to automatically provision the database right through the command line. It's wild. So we're going to have the table name events. Now we can add columns to the table. What would we like those to be? Well, fortunately, I've already kind of thought through what we want. And essentially, this is essentially the data object that we're going to go ahead and use for the table. Now, we have an ID, which is a universally unique identifier. So every single event has its own unique ID. And then we have a mentor ID, and this is the ID of the mentor that posted the event. We have the name of the event, a description, a link to any sort of outside URL, the date, the start time, and the end time, right? Okay. So, and then we have, of course, the created at, which is a little timestamp. So what we're going to do for right now is we're going to go ahead and we're gonna go ahead and add another attribute actually called type. This.state.type. But for right now, what we would like to name this column, we're gonna go ahead and add the key mentor ID, and we're going to make this a string. It's gonna ask us, would we like to add another column? If we just press enter, it's going to assume we're saying no. So we want to go ahead and press yes, right? And what would we like to name this column? This is going to be the name of our sort key. So we're going to go ahead and call it, and we're going to sort by created at. And since created at being a date.now object, it's actually a number. It's the number of milliseconds since 1970. So we're going to have the data type be a number. When it asks, would you like to add another column? We're going to go ahead and say no for now, because frankly, it's just not necessary. The thing about NoSQL is that you're able to add new and different fields for every single entry in the database as long as you have the two primary keys. So as long as you have the mentor ID, which is our index key, we're going to search through DynamoDB for all events by a certain mentor, and we're going to sort those through the created at attribute, meaning it's going to automatically sort them by creation date. So would I like to add another column? No. So here it's asking us to choose the partition key. So let's read it through. So before you create the database, you must specify how items in your table are uniquely organized. You do this by specifying a primary key. The primary key uniquely identifies each item in the table so that no two items can have the same key. This can be an individual column or a combination that includes a primary key and sort key. So regardless, choosing our partition key, our primary key, we're going to go ahead and choose mentor ID, and we'll go ahead and add the sort key created at. Here it's asking, do we want to add a global secondary index? And a global secondary index essentially is another primary key that you can use to query by. So let's say, for example, we want to query all events by type of event, or by location, right? We want to get all events in Washington State, or we want to get all events that are of type meetup. We could add a global secondary index called type that we could then query to return all events with a type of meetup or pair programming, etc. For now, we're not going to do that. And something to keep in mind is that while this can be an effective way of creating multiple workflows in your NoSQL database, keep in mind that if you have multiple global secondary indexes, I believe it affects the total amount of throughput that your database requires, which can make database operations more expensive. But at any rate, we're going to go ahead and say no. Do we want to add a Lambda trigger for the table? So this is asking, do we want to add some sort of a Lambda function that is automatically activated when a specific event happens on the table? Well, we're going to go ahead and say no. So successfully added DynamoDB table locally. Do you want to access other resources created in this project from your Lambda function? I'm going to go ahead and say no. Do I want to edit the local Lambda function now? I'm going to go ahead and say no. Do we want to restrict API access? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Who should have access? Authenticated users. What kind of access do you want for authenticated users? We'll go ahead and give them everything. Do I want to add another path? No. Okay, so now we can go ahead and check Amplify status again, and we can see what's going on. And here, so we've created a API, we've created a function, and we've created storage. So now when we go ahead and run Amplify push, it's going to go ahead and create all three of those resources, and it's going to deploy them using CloudFormation. Very, very cool. So this will take a couple of minutes. Um, we'll come back and we'll resume in 5, 4, 3, 2. So now that we've deployed our new API using AWS Amplify, we can go ahead and integrate this into our React application itself. So as you might remember, Amplify automatically generates a JSON file which has the information for all of the Amplify resources that were created. So if we type Amplify status to check on the status of our CLI objects, we see here that the storage function API have now been deployed and that there are no changes currently pending. So that means we can check our AWS-exports file and see if it was automatically updated. And it sure looks like it was. So this is great. So we have a new DynamoDB table as well as a new cloud logic, which essentially is an API endpoint right here, right, named events. So let's go ahead and test out this new events API. So let's go ahead and check that this new DynamoDB table was in fact created, which, probably is. Let's go ahead and sign back in. Give them a solid 4 stars. Here we go, events-prod with our mentor ID being the active key. Cool. Okay, so how do we want to integrate this into the system? It's a good question. Why don't we create a modal? We can create a modal that pops up, when we have a button pop up, and we'll insert some props into the modal, and we'll have some business logic execute. Seems like a pretty good, pretty okay implementation here. So let's see here. We previously made a modal here, I believe, right? The content modal, right? This one, however, was a presentational component. So I think this time around, we want to use a class component. Because since we want to have forms, we want to have inputs, we want to have a handle change function, we want to have a handle submit function as well to handle the inputs that were created. So let's think about where else in the application do we currently have forms. Well, we definitely have some forms in our profile form component, and we definitely have a validate form function. We have a handle change function. Here we have a handle create profile, which has our API requests here, and we have some forms. So let's go ahead and use this as our foundation here. And let's go ahead, we'll go ahead and command A, we'll go ahead and take that, and let's go ahead and create a new component called event modal.js. First thing we want to do here, we want to change all the instances of profile form to event modal, and we want to do a couple of things. So we want to edit these fields to represent the new form values. So let's press Option Z to soft wrap everything here. We want to keep the handle change function. We want to change this to create an event, right? So since we're only going to have one function, let's go ahead and call it handle submit. Or we'll give it a better name. We'll say handle create events. And so we don't need this. We don't need this user object. We don't need this apprenticeship object. And we certainly don't need this product object. Now, what we do need is we need to have a body object. And so let's see here. And so this is the object that we need to successfully create our event, right? So let's press Command left bracket to move that like so. And we don't need most of these. Change that to being events. Right, so here we have our body object that we need. We need to have an ID, right? We need to have a mentor ID. We need to have a name, a description, a link, a date, a start, a type, and an end, and a create event. But where are we getting these pieces of information from? Well, the mentor ID, this can come from props. So we'll go ahead and well, actually, yeah, we'll go ahead and put this in under props, because only mentors are going to be able to create an event here. So what we're going to do is, if our user has a type of mentor or instructor or whatever it is, then we are going to allow them to create an event. We're going to show them the button that's going to let them create an event. And we're going to pass down the mentor ID into this component through props. And so here we have the name of the event, we have the description of the event, we have the link, and we have a date and a start and a type and an end. We can probably, for convenience sake, press Option up, move that up here. So a couple of things. So we need to obviously change the form, right? We need to change this into a modal. So let's look here, and so let's see. We have modal show, modal header, modal body. Okay, so let's go ahead and take that, and we want to go ahead and import the modal and button here. And let's go ahead, and we actually we don't have this class name. It's not quite relevant here. Let's go ahead and put in this modal here, right? And so for the modal heading, we'll say create event. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this entire body right here, and see here, we're going to take almost this entire body for now. We're going to take all those forms, and we're going to go ahead and put them in the modal body right there. However, we don't actually need a lot of these forms, like for example, country, city, GitHub username, last name. A lot of these just flat out aren't really relevant. So let's go ahead and push these up here. Righto. Okay, and so we don't need an F name, we just need a name, an event name, right? Now let's think about what are the other attributes that we need here, right? So up here we have Right, so this is the body. This is the request body that we need to send. So instead of fname, we just need name, and then we need a description, and then we need a link, and a date, and a start, and an end, and a type. Okay. So we now have the right fields here, but what we need to do is we need to make sure that our forms properly match up, right? So we have the event name here, which is cool. It's great. But we also need to have the description and we need to have the link. We need to have the date. The start. The end. And we're using Command D to effortlessly move through all of the same spelled words here. You just press Command D. And we're also going to want to have a type. Okay. Now this button here. This button's going to be replaced by this fancy loader button. I guess we can just comment that out for now. Now, this .validate form is currently active. However, this validate form isn't actually using the proper attributes that we want. Okay. So now we updated that to reflect the proper type of attributes. But we need to also make sure that everything is wrapped in a form here so that we can press enter to submit the form if we so desire. I think what we could do is we could just wrap the entire modal like so. I could be wrong on that, but we'll check in a quick moment. We are importing the loader button. Something that I wonder is that this name for the API request that we want to send, this is obviously not correct here. Go ahead and save this for now, but let's take a look at our AWS. Oh, let's press Command P and let's go into our AWS exports file. And so here we can see that the name of this logic is called events. So why don't we go ahead and change this to be events with /events. And instead of saying body : user, we can just have body working like that. And then what we can do here is instead of changing the navigation of the application, because we're already in the home page, when we click on that button to open the modal, it's not going to take us anywhere new. Hold on. I don't think so. It's not going to take us anywhere new, I don't think. What we need to do is we need to run, we need to set the state of the modal. We need to change the props.show to hide. So what we need to do is we need to execute props.handleClose. Or in this case, this.props.handleClose. Now we can actually take this outside of the try-catch block, put this here. And so this is, since this is now a class component, we're not using props.show, we're using this.props.show. I guess let's put that back out here. Okay. I want to say that should work. Okay, well, let's go ahead and try it out. So what we need to do now is inside of the dashboard, we need to go ahead and import this new component. So let's go ahead and import event modal from the components folder. And let's go ahead and stick it down here by the content modal. And like the content modal, we're going to have to include some props. So we'll say show equals this.state.event or show event modal. For handle close, we'll go ahead and write this dot handle close event. And we'll also include a mentor ID being this dot props dot user dot ID. Okay. So we need to create a new object in our state called show event modal with the default value being false. And we need to create a new function called handle close event. We'll also create a new one called handle show event modal. Okay, and now all we need to do is we need to have a button towards the very top here to create event, and then the onClick function is simply a set state operation to set show event modal to true. Well, there we go. So let's kind of summarize what just happened here, right? So we created a file called event modal, and what we did was we took the content from the profile form component and from the content modal, and we kind of combined the two together. So we added forms from the profile component, and we added the modal from the content modal. So what we did is we imported the event modal component into the dashboard right here. And we set up its show value to equal this.state.show event modal. We set up a unique handle close function to be this.handle close event. And we also sent in a props called mentor ID, which was the user ID, right? So what we have here is that when this create event button is activated, We can also close it here too. It's nice. We also still have the handle change function to be able to write stuff out, to be able to update the state of the inputs. And we also have a handle create event right here that similar to the profile form component, which has a function called handle create profile. It takes some objects and uses them as the request body of some API requests that we are sending to a specific API endpoint. So this Pareto is referring to our MongoDB API, whereas here, this events is referring to the Amplify CLI function that we just made here, because our AWS-exports automatically integrated our newly deployed function here. So what does that mean for us? Well, what it means is we could probably actually test this out. But before we actually test it out with a live API request, why don't we just console log the body of this request to just check that everything that we're sending out, the body object that we're supposed to be sending out to the event, to create the event, is actually working here. So let's go ahead and type stand up meeting 10-minute check-in to see how much progress has been made in the last 24 hours. Event link, let's just say we're going to change this to google.com. We'll add some event date pickers later to actually make this a more intuitive process of picking times for this event. For now, we'll settle for the basic typing. And so here we'll also say it's a stand up. Okay, now let's go ahead and run this change password function and see what happens. Uh-oh. What's going on? Why isn't it activating? What's going on? Well, could it be that the form that we're trying to access it with has a function from the previous file? This one says handle create profile, but here we're trying to access this handle create event. So it's trying to access a function that doesn't exist inside the scope of this container. So let's go ahead and try it again. Stand up meeting. 15-minute check-in. Now we'll just go ahead and put some dummy data here. There's no need to get too crazy into this mock data. Interesting. So this isn't working. It can only lead me to assume that's because this form is not properly being registered here. Well, let's do something about that. So let's go ahead, take these buttons. Let's go ahead and put them inside of the modal body here. Let's go ahead and take this form component, put that inside the modal body. Now let's go ahead and take that. Let's put it inside the modal body. Okay. Okay. Let's see what that looks like. add some more dummy data here. So the reason why that might not be working is because the form tag needs to be wrapped over continuous forms with an enclosing button. So because they were being separated by this modal body and modal footer, I think it wasn't properly registering the form's existence there. 8/19/2019. Okay, let's try again. Let's press the enter button. Oh, okay. Well, there we go. And then that the modal disappeared. So that means that this .props handle close did its job, and here is the event here. So we have our we have a created app, we have our timestamp, we have our date, which is listed here as undefined. We have a description, we have an end, we have a start, we have a type, we have a name, we have a mentor ID, we have a link, we have an ID, we have everything except the date. So what's going on here? This state.chosen date. Right. So do we not have a date object here? Oh, we have a date, we have a this.state.date, but this is using something called chosen date. Well, we can just go ahead and change this to date. Now, that should be working. So let's go ahead and run this bad boy, and let's go ahead and open up our network tab, because that's what we're going to do to check whether this is truly working. Now we'll call this daily stand-up. Daily stand-up, a quick 15-minute check-in for structure and accountability. We'll go ahead and have just a Google page, event date 08/19/2019, whatever. 10 a.m., 10 p.m., event type, stand up. Now let's take a look at what happens here. Whoa, API events does not exist. Whoa, 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 whoa. What's happening here? Why is that not working? Hold on. What's going on here? Could it be that maybe we need to reset our node server here? Because we auto-generated that API, but you know, when you've installed a new npm module, and for example, when you've installed new environment variables, you need to reset your React application so that it absorbs that new configuration. So maybe that's what's going on here. Let's quickly check in here. Maybe that was the issue. So let's go ahead and say stand up, 10 minutes, check in, google.com, tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It says API events does not exist. Interesting. Okay. So let's go back here. So Pareto training web prod. So storage events. So let's see what we called it here. Please provide a friendly name for this resource. Please provide a friendly name for your resource to be used as a label for this category in the project. Events. Choose a Lambda source. Create a new Lambda function. Provide a friendly name for your resource to be used as a label. So perhaps it's Pareto events here. Well, let's go ahead and see. I can imagine that this is This is the answer. Let us pray. Stand up meeting, 10 minutes check-in, google.com, 8/19/2019, 10 a.m., 10:15 a.m., stand up. And we can press enter. This API Pareto events does not exist. Interesting. Very interesting. It says it doesn't exist. That's very interesting. So perhaps Amplify is being configured here. But when we're doing this API.configure here, this API configuration is overriding any API configuration that's being done here. So this is the name of the DynamoDB table. It's called events-prod. So that's probably not it. This name is called events. This is the endpoint, and this is the region. So let's say that this is in fact overriding what's going on here. So let's go ahead and create this one called name:events, and for the endpoint, let's go ahead and copy over the endpoint from here, and the region was US East 1. Okay. So now if we go back to event modal here, let's just change it back to plain old vanilla events. And let's go ahead and run this again and see if we can get something to work. Well, there we go. So I think what seemed to have happened here was that since we were running this separate API.configure operation, we were overriding the configuration that Amplify was running here, which included configuring this API. So, okay, maybe that's the correct answer. Maybe there's a different explanation for that. But what we do know is that we now have something that's working because we received 200 responses here. 200 response means stuff worked. And now let's go into our DynamoDB table here, and let's see if we have something. Hey. There we go. Okay. Awesome. So let's go ahead and so we successfully sent that post request, right? Which is awesome. So now, we can theoretically get those requests in the future. And what we need to do that is we need to send an API request to events/events/ the mentor ID that we are using. So let's quickly do that. So we'll go back to the dashboard here. Or actually, we'll go to app.js here. We're going to add another API call here. And we're going to add a object called events into this .state. So we're going to say constant events equals await api.get events slash events slash, and then we have an interpolated string here, user.id. And remember, it's important to qualify user 0.id. And now we'll go ahead and we'll include that in our setState function here. Now let's go ahead and let's go into our dashboard and see if we can, let's go into our dashboard and let's see if we can access those events through props. Hold on here. So constant events equals await api.get. Let's go ahead and console log our events here real quick. So it looks like we are getting those events. Right, we are getting those events here. And we're logging them on line 33. But we're not quite, oh, huh, so silly. Why aren't we getting these events? Well, if we're trying to access these events through React Router, we have to remember that we're sending these props into React Router through an object called child props. So all we have to do is we have to add this .state.events to child props, and we should be able to access it in the grand scheme of the router props. There we go. So one more quick little bitty. So let's really quickly set up and render the list of upcoming events here in the application. So let's go ahead and make, well, how do we want to do this, right? So as you can see, the UI is kind of getting a little fuzzy here, right? Like this create event button doesn't really look that great right here, right? Like that's not a great look. We might want to organize this in a little bit more efficient of a way. We'll get to in a future video. We're gonna create a instructor section for instructors to be able to create events for their students in a special instructor page. But we are going to want to display the events in a way here that our users can say, oh, so this is an upcoming event that I have here. So since we've been using modals so often, why don't we just go ahead and make another modal? This modal that we have already here is already something. It's called event modal. Why don't we change it to create event modal here? And we can go ahead and update imports. Yes. Sure. Failed to import an event modal. Oh. Huh. Right. So it's giving us a quick issue here. Let's restart the dev server. Let's see if that could fix the issue here. Ah, dashboard.js. That's the culprit. So what's going on is we're trying to call a function, trying to call something that no longer exists. Okay, should work now. So let's go ahead and create a modal to show our events, right? And this one, it's gonna be a pretty simple modal. All we really care about here is we want a presentational modal. We just want something to show and loop through all of our events. So why don't we go ahead and create an event modal that this is going to simply show. It's going to simply show our events, right? And props.events. And so here it's mapping through stuff and it's showing resource.title. So what are the items in our props here to take a look at? We want to take a look in our, not in our dashboard, in our, so yeah, so what are the items that we need to have? We need to be able to show information about the name, the description, link, date, start, end, etc. Right? Okay, so here, we have a link, an anchor tag for the link. So now let's go ahead and add a h4 tag or something for the resource dot name, right? And here, instead of calling everything a resource, let's go ahead and change it to event. And view link. And so we need to talk about the event description, right? And then we want to have the start and end, right? And, why not? We'll also include the type. Okay. Right. So that should theoretically work for us. Now, what we need to do is we need to, again, we need to go ahead and import the event modal from the components, right? And what are we passing into this component as props? Well, we're passing in props.show and handle close and the events, right? Okay, and so show create event modal. We're going to make another one called show events modal false. Right. Okay, so I guess for convenience we'll just keep it like that. So let's find all of these. Handle close event, show create event modal. And then we're going to import the event modal here below all these, and we're going to pass in events as this.props.events. Handle close is going to be this.handle close events, and we're going to make this one handle close create events. And what else do we pass in as props? We passed in oh yeah, the show. That's right. So show is going to be equal to this dot state dot show event modal. Right. So we need to create a new function called handle right. How did this even work? Show handle show create modal handle show event modal. So at this point we're having you know, a lot of modals. You know, a modal really isn't the one-size-fits-all solution to every single problem, so I really wouldn't you know, go modal crazy in your applications, but I think for the purpose of what we're doing here for now, this seems like a decent way of doing what we need to do. In the future, we can actually refactor all these show and close events to simply take the type of modal that we want and add that in here so that we don't have to have 3 different ones. We could just have one. But we can take care of that in a bit. So we have handle show event modal. And then we're going to have one called handle close create event. And then we'll have one called handle close event. Handle close event. Goodness gracious. Right. Right. Show event modal, show content modal, show create event modal. So we have show content modal, show create event modal, show event modal. Okay. You know, I think this is gonna work. You know, a brother hopes it would. So let's go ahead and add another little button here to show all of our beautiful, beautiful events. Show upcoming events. This dot set states show event modal :true, and then here we're actually going to show create event modal is true. Okay. Alrighty, let's see if this is all working. So if we want to create an event, we have our create modal. If we want to show upcoming events, okay. Now let's go ahead and create another quick event here just to be sure. Another one, DJ Khaled. You know, the Bahamas, 11, 11, 11, 12. Or what time does the party jump? I don't know, like 11 p.m. Party stops until 6 in the morning. And then, you know, this one, social events. So let's go ahead and, oh, that's interesting here. Oh, that's, wait. Change password. What? Why? Yeah, I need to quickly change password. Definitely should not be. That should definitely not be the text. Let's go ahead and change that to create events for sure. Well, now let's go ahead and show upcoming events. Well, as we can see here, it's only showing us that one event, right? That's not what we want, right? Like if we refresh this and we have the app load again, we can see that it's going to show us both. So why didn't it show us that event after we created it? Because it was there. Well, the answer is that we didn't refresh the state of our application with the latest information from our API. Now you might ask, Misha, how do we do such a beautiful and glorious thing? Well, what we want to do is we want to have a function inside of our app.js that will fetch the latest series of events and reset the state here after we successfully create the event. So what we need to do is we need to create a function called fetch events, which is going to go ahead and basically just say constant events is equal to await api.get events. Basically the same thing as the function above, right? Except we're going to, instead of saying user0.id, we're actually just going to call this.state.user.id. And now we're going to this.set state events colon events. And so once we have these updated events from our API and we set the state of our events object with these updated events, the changes should propagate throughout React Router and it should update our data. So, and then just in case, you know, just to track our activity, we'll go ahead and console log events here as well. Okay, so, but in order for this function to be called, we also need to pass this function down through a React Router and be able to call it through this.props.fetch events. So now when we're here, cannot use keyword await outside of an async function. Interesting. Well, that's because we need to make this into an async function, obviously. So now if we go into create event modal, so after we create the event, we want to call this.props.fetch events, right? Seems pretty simple. One problem. If we try to call this right now, nothing's going to happen because fetch events is currently not being passed into create event modal as a prop. So what we need to do is inside of our dashboard, we need to pass we need to go ahead and pass fetch events as what it is. So this is what's referred to as props drilling, meaning that we're getting this dot props dot fetch events inside of the dashboard JS, but we need to manually pass it in to create event modal. Or we could be ballers and we could just simply pass down literally every single thing in the this.props object into create event modal. That's a solution as well. But for now, we'll be careful with what we pass in, and we'll just go ahead and pass in this.fetch events. So let's see if that works for us. Let's go ahead and have the product giveaway. 5 free copies for review in exchange for video reviews / unboxings. Something. This is all dummy data, Okay, let's go ahead and press enter. Okay, so we had this post call succeed, and we had a fetch come through. So right here, this is what the console log was. So this fetch events function was properly passed down through React Router, passed down manually from the dashboard into the create events modal as a prop, called here, which then sent us back to the execution context here, where we executed the API request, we console logged everything, right? So we have these 3 events, right? And if we show upcoming events, it'll show all 3 of them now, because we took that event and we set the state of events to be this new events object. And then since that was the inside of the object child props instead of the render, this object updated and it triggered a re-render inside of React Router, right? Which came in here, and it in the home component, right here, it triggered an update inside of the dashboard because everything this.props was updated, which led to this events, this.props.events, updating as well. So not too bad. And right after we created that new event, it showed up without us having to refresh anything. So now some of you might say, well, it's kind of a pain, that whole process, right? You have to send in the function this.props.fetch events through the app.js, and you have to manually send it into the modal to then be triggered. Yeah, it's kind of a pain. There's another solution, a couple of solutions that mitigate that pain. You can use something like Redux to handle a global data store, which enforces one-way data flow, and which basically connects that global state to the entire application. If you look at how our data is structured here, we also have a global data store that is then passed out throughout the entire function. So if we're looking at the Flux data model, we are essentially following it. The implementation is different, and we're using the React Router to distribute our props instead of using the Redux Connect function. And here what we're doing is we're essentially we're replacing the events object here. It's a pretty simple replacement here. It's essentially a reducer, but it also handles side effects like this API request. So we're gonna have in a future episode coming up very shortly, we're gonna have a we're going to have some refactoring of parts of our state management into Redux, so that you can see firsthand what that looks like, because it's going to be pretty important for you in terms of having, you know, having that knowledge of how Redux works is going to be very crucial for you. A lot of development teams professionally use it, and it would, to be quite honest, be malpractice for me to not teach you how it functions and how it operates. And we're going to be refactoring a good bit of our code using a Redux store. But again, keep in mind that this code is functional, and that a Redux store is, quite frankly, not necessary for everything. Um, Something that engineers tend to do is engineers tend to over-engineer things, and they tend to make things more difficult for themselves than they really need to be. This works, and it works pretty elegantly, in my opinion, without much boilerplate at all. And the way that the home.js works here, this is kind of janky, to be completely honest. It could work even more elegantly than it currently is. So, but at any rate, to kind of summarize what we went through, what we did was we actually did a lot here. We went ahead and we configured a new serverless CRUD API using DynamoDB through Amplify CLI. We then went ahead and we configured the new API here in our API.configure function. And then we were able to call it, right, to be able to receive the events in our component did mount in our central data store in our app.js. And we were able to distribute those events, and we were able to view them here. The very cool thing is we're also able to create these events. This is interesting. So this is still going on, and this state is still very much the same. So the last thing we're going to do before we finish this video is we're going to basically wipe this state for this local modal. We're going to wipe it clean so that if you wanted to add another event right after it, you wouldn't be stuck in this infinitely loading glitch, and all of this text would be blank. So how do we do that, right? So really the easiest way and really kind of the only way to do it is to basically just wipe the state clean. So name is going to be blank, description is going to be blank, link is going to be blank, start blank, date blank, end blank, type blank. But also this loader button here, the loader button is dependent on a value called this.state.isChanging. So what we're also going to do is we're going to set isChanging to false. So now let's run through this flow one more quick time. And what we're also going to do is we'll also add a quick little bit of user interactivity here, or user friendliness here. And what we'll do is we're going to actually tell the user how many upcoming events there are. And how we do that is pretty simple. We'll go ahead and say this.props.events.length. So what it's doing here is it's saying there are 3 upcoming events. Now we can go ahead and create a new event. Last one for today. Ta-da, ta-da, yo, yo, ta-da, ta-da. Press enter. Immediately updated. And if we press create event, we find that things are ready for us. And of course our validation function is working. So that is all working. Pretty productive day for us here. But as you can see, within an hour, essentially, it took us an hour, but we were able to create, deploy, and integrate a CRUD API into a React application.